When Samantha's work dinners started piling up like unpaid bills, Mark did what any reasonable systems analyst would do. He investigated. Quietly, methodically. What he found was worse than he expected, and it was about to make breakfast unbearably awkward. Mark wasn't the suspicious type, or at least that's what he told himself. But when Samantha began clutching her phone like it was a lifeline and staying out, networking well past midnight, even he couldn't brush it off as innocent. In the early days, she'd text him updates from work events. Lately, she didn't even bother. Instead, she'd come home smelling faintly of a cologne he didn't own, brushing off his questioning looks with a distracted, "It's late. Can we not do this now?" Mark believed in one thing above all else: data. Emotions were messy and unreliable, but data didn't lie. It was cold, hard, and clear just the way he liked it. Samantha's behavior felt like one of those bugs he spent his days debugging in client software. And like any bug, it could be analyzed and fixed. All he needed was the right tools. 3 nights ago, while Samantha was out for drinks with her team, Mark turned to something he trusted more than her: his laptop. Stress-testing digital infrastructures was his job, and to him, a marriage wasn't so different from a computer system. You just had to know where to look for the cracks. In less than 10 minutes, he had installed monitoring software on her phone. It was invisible on her screen and sent real-time updates to his email, texts, calls, locations, the works. For a brief moment, guilt washed over him, but it dissolved quickly, replaced by the clinical detachment he used when dealing with lazy clients who compromised their own systems. He clicked install and understood two things in that instant. He had crossed a line, and he was okay with it. The very next day, the data rolled in. It wasn't a dramatic, explicit confession, but it was enough: a flirty back and forth with a guy named Brad. Brad, the type who probably wore fitted polos and referred to every beer as a cold one. Brad's messages were peppered with winky faces and thinly veiled intentions. Then came the smoking gun. "See you at 7 at my place. You know where the key is."
Can't wait.
Mark didn't feel anger or heartbreak, just a detached curiosity, like watching a bad movie you can't turn off. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place: the late nights, the locked phone, the perfumed clothes. Mostly, he felt vindicated. His gut and the data had been right all along. The next morning, Mark did something he hadn't done in years. He got up early and made breakfast. Pancakes, to be specific. Samantha used to love them before her life became one long networking event. When she came downstairs and saw the spread, she hesitated. Her usual air of practiced distraction gave way to surprise. Mark had a smirk as he watched her try to gauge his mood. "Morning," he said, motioning to the pancakes. "Thought it'd be nice to have a normal breakfast." She blinked, thrown off balance but trying not to show it.
Oh, wow.
"Thanks, Mark." She sat across from him, forcing a warm smile as she reached for tea.
He's syrup.
Her phone was nowhere in sight, but Mark knew it wasn't far. The table beside her hand wobbled slightly as they ate in silence. Mark occasionally sliced through the quiet with questions about her day or plans. Samantha kept her answers short and polite, oblivious to what was coming. When her plate was nearly empty, Mark leaned back, sipped his coffee, and finally spoke. "So, how's Brad's?" Her fork paused midair. Her face shifted, a fascinating transition from surprise to confusion to a practiced smile. The smile froze as she realized he was serious. "Who?" she managed, her voice a pitch higher than usual. "Brad," Mark repeated with a shrug, his tone light, almost casual. "The guy you were with last night. Don't insult my intelligence, Sam. I've seen the texts." Her face twisted with a mix of disbelief and anger. "You went through my phone," she said, trying for indignation, but guilt seeped through her expression like ink on wet paper. "Yep," he replied, taking another bite of pancake, savoring it as if they were discussing the weather. When you leave your phone next to someone who tests security systems for a living, you're practically inviting him to take a peek. She scowled, her defensiveness slipping. "Maybe if you paid more attention to me and less to your laptop, we wouldn't be having this conversation." Mark chuckled, the sound colder than he intended. "I think I've been paying plenty of attention, Sam." More than you know. But hey, I guess I'm just the guy who pays the bills around here, right? He pointed his fork at her, grinning as her face reddened. Here's the deal. You've got until tonight to pack your things. I'll be back at 8. If you're still here, I'll help you carry your boxes out. If not, well, we both get what we wanted. Her mouth opened and closed as she sputtered, searching for a retort. Mark watched her struggle, a rational part of him finding satisfaction in seeing her trapped by her own choices. Finally, she stormed upstairs, likely to call Brad, beg forgiveness, or cry. It didn't matter. He grabbed his keys and left, already decided on how the rest of the day would play out. At exactly 8 p.m., Mark returned. The same unshakable calm draped over him. Samantha's car was still in the driveway, as expected. He hadn't truly thought she'd leave without a last attempt at a performance. When he stepped inside, he found her on the couch, looking tense. Her hair was disheveled, and a few half-packed boxes were scattered around. She wore a mix of sadness and defiance, a look that had always served her well in the past. "Mark," she began, her voice softer than usual, trying to sound vulnerable. "Can we just talk for a minute?" "By all means," he said, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching her with cool detachment. Samantha's gaze dropped as if searching for the right words. She paused, adding a touch of drama. "Look, I know I screwed up. But maybe if you and I tried to—" "Spare me," he interrupted, gesturing toward the half-packed box near her feet. "I'm here to make sure you leave, not to play therapist." She gave him a wounded look, though they both knew she'd rehearsed for this moment. "This isn't easy for me, Mark," she said, clutching at some invisible thread of sympathy. Mark shrugged, his expression unmoved. "It's not supposed to be easy. That's what happens when you face consequences." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she kept her voice low, controlled. "Maybe if you paid as much attention to me as you do to your computers, none of this would have happened." "All right, that's on me, isn't it?" he replied deadpan. "You got bored. So here we are. Maybe I should have downloaded some new software, updated my relationship protocols to keep you entertained." "Is that really how you're going to handle this?" she snapped. "Throw away years of marriage because of one mistake." She made a last attempt at tears, her eyes welling up, hand over her chest with a kind of staged sincerity he used to fall for. Funny how transparent it all seemed now. "One mistake," he said, his voice colder. "Funny how you can call it that when it's been months of texting, sneaking around, and meeting up with Brad. Or does your math work differently?" Her face hardened. "I've had enough of this," she snapped, her voice losing its soft edge. "You can't just throw me out." Mark straightened, stepping away from the door. "Oh, I think you'll find that I can." Mark pulled a neatly folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and handed it to Samantha with a small, smug smile. "I thought you might want to keep this as a memento." Samantha frowned and snatched the paper from his hand. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the words as her face paled. "Dear Brad, thanks for taking over so much of my wife's time. She's clearly happier with you. And hey, you're welcome to the bill she's racked up under my roof. Thought you'd like to know that she won't be staying here anymore. Good luck explaining that to your wife." "Mark." Her mouth fell open, her hands trembling as she held the paper. You sent this to him?" "Oh, I sent it to him. All right," Mark said, his tone calm and clipped. "And since I had a little extra time this afternoon, I also sent a copy to his wife. Lovely woman. She found it just as interesting as I did." Samantha's face went white, the shock quickly giving way to anger. "You had no right." "Actually, I had every right," he cut in, as composed as ever. "You wanted Brad? Well, now he gets the whole package. And you? You get to explain yourself to everyone you fooled along the way." She stared at him, fists clenched, looking like someone who had just realized the game had completely slipped out of her hands. "I never thought you'd do something this petty," she snapped. Mark laughed, a short, hollow sound. "Petty? No, Sam. I'm just thorough. It's what I'm paid to do." He gestured to the boxes stacked nearby. "Now, get packing. I've done more than enough for you." Samantha opened her mouth, maybe to argue, to scream, or even to cry, but no words came. For once, she was left standing there, completely at a loss. And for Mark, that was almost enough. When she finally left, Mark sat alone in the stillness of the house. He half expected her to come back, banging on the door with some desperate excuse or empty apology. But the minutes ticked by, and the house stayed silent. Outside, her car finally pulled away, its taillights shrinking into the darkness. For the first time in what felt like years, Mark took a deep, steady breath. He had spent so many months feeling trapped in a twisted game, moving pieces around in a puzzle he couldn't see. Now that it was over, he felt something unexpected, not relief, not sadness, just emptiness. It was as if all the noise that had consumed his life had been abruptly silenced. Yet, with the emptiness came a strange sense of closure, the kind that comes from finally shutting a door that had been creaking open for far too long. Mark wasn't sure what his next move would be, or how he'd rebuild from this. Maybe he'd take up running or go on that road trip he'd always postponed. But whatever it was, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't be looking back.